The night air was thick with smoke and fear. Torches flickered along the riverbank, reflecting in water that had already seen too much blood. Somewhere beyond the drums and shouting, a single woman stood alone, knowing that by sunrise her people might no longer exist. History would not remember this moment kindly. It would try to forget it entirely. She was born into a world that did not intend to let her rule. In the late 16th century, in the highlands of Central Africa, power moved through men, through lineage, through violence. Kingdoms rose and fell not by ink or law, but by fire and iron. The land of Ndongo lived under constant pressure, neighboring rivals, internal fractures, and a new foreign hunger arriving from the coast. The Portuguese had come with crosses, cannons, and contracts written in a language no one here spoke. They called it trade. Ndongo called it survival. From childhood, she listened more than she spoke. While her brothers trained with spears, she learned the rhythm of words. While others dreamed of victory in battle, she studied how wars actually began, through insults, through broken promises, through silence. She watched men underestimate her, and she learned how dangerous that habit could be. When her father ruled, she was close enough to power to understand it, but far enough to see its flaws. She learned that a throne was not a chair. It was a burden carried on the backs of the living. And when her brother took the crown after their father's death, she saw how quickly a kingdom could begin to rot from the inside. The Portuguese noticed her long before they feared her. To them, she was useful, a negotiator, a voice they could bend. They did not yet understand that she was learning them as carefully as they were studying her. The first time she was sent to negotiate, it was meant as an insult disguised as diplomacy. The governor received her seated high, surrounded by soldiers, while she was offered no chair at all. The message was clear. She was to stand. She was to bow. She was to remember her place. She did neither. She ordered one of her attendants to kneel and calmly sat on the human throne created beneath her, at eye level, equal, silent, unmoving. That moment did not change the world, but it cracked something open. Treaties were signed that day. Promises were made. Some were kept. Most were not. They rarely are when power believes it is permanent. But when she walked out of that chamber, she carried something more valuable than ink. She carried knowledge. She knew how her enemies thought. She knew how they lied. And she knew how much they feared a woman who refused to play her assigned role. Soon after, blood followed. Her brother's rule collapsed under rebellion and betrayal. When he died, the kingdom fractured, and Ndongo stood on the edge of annihilation. Many expected her to disappear into history's margins, like so many women before her. Instead, she stepped forward. She claimed authority not through tradition, but through necessity, not through permission, but through action. She took command of warriors who had never followed a woman. She made alliances with former enemies. She broke customs that could not protect her people anymore. Each choice cost her something: friends, safety, sleep, but she paid willingly. War followed her name like a shadow. Villages burned. Captives were taken. The slave trade expanded its grip, feeding distant empires with stolen lives. She fought not just an invading force, but a system designed to erase her world piece by piece. And still, she adapted. When armies failed, she used diplomacy. When diplomacy failed, she used faith. When faith failed, she used fear. If you want to understand how fragile freedom is, stay with this story, because what she did next would force empires to change their plans and rewrite what power looked like in a world that had never intended to listen to her. The river would run darker before it ran clear, and her greatest battles were still ahead. Power did not come to her like a coronation. It came like a wound. Ndongo was already bleeding when she claimed it. Chiefs argued, armies splintered. The Portuguese pressed deeper inland, building forts where villages once stood, baptizing captives before selling them, calling it salvation. The old rules had collapsed, and the people waited, some in hope, some in fear, to see who would rise from the ruins. She rose knowing many would never accept her. The elders whispered that a woman could not rule warriors, that spirits would turn away, that tradition itself would revolt. She listened, then she acted. She did not ask permission from the past. She forced the present to obey. Her first move was ruthless and deliberate. Rivals who questioned her authority were removed, not always by the blade, sometimes by exile, sometimes by isolation. Mercy, she understood, was a luxury of stability. Ndongo had none. Every hesitation invited collapse. Every delay invited chains. She reshaped power so it could survive. War followed almost immediately. Portuguese-backed forces advanced with muskets and mercenaries, confident that internal division would finish what their cannons had begun. They underestimated her again. She abandoned cities before they could be trapped. She scorched ground rather than let it feed invaders. She turned retreat into strategy, forcing enemies to chase shadows while their supply lines thinned. Her people suffered for these choices. She never pretended otherwise. Hunger stalked the camps. Mothers buried children. Warriors questioned her silence at night, mistaking grief for weakness. But she did not break. She absorbed loss the way stone absorbs rain, quietly, relentlessly. Then she did something no one expected. She converted, not in spirit, but in calculation. She took a Christian name and stood before Portuguese officials as an ally, a sister in faith. She spoke their language. She attended their rituals. She smiled when they believed they had finally tamed her. Treaties followed. Temporary peace followed. Time followed. Time was the real prize. During that fragile calm, she rebuilt. She reorganized her forces, trained soldiers in new tactics, and absorbed European methods without surrendering control. She learned how empires negotiated, how they stalled, how they lied politely. And when the Portuguese broke their promises, as they always did, she was ready. This was the moment she stopped merely surviving. She founded a new power base farther south, beyond immediate Portuguese reach. There she ruled not as a temporary leader, but as a monarch in full command. She took on titles reserved for kings. She wore male regalia when it suited authority. She bent gender itself into a weapon, refusing to be confined by it. Her court became a place of discipline and fear. Loyalty was rewarded, betrayal was erased. She demanded absolute obedience, not because she desired dominance, but because fragmentation would destroy them all. In a world devouring the weak, unity was the only shield. The Portuguese responded with renewed violence. Battles followed, messy, brutal, inconclusive.
Victory shifted back and forth like a curse. She lost territory, she regained it. She watched allies fall and enemies regroup. Through it all, the slave trade expanded, swallowing entire communities. Each chained march hardened her resolve. Each ship leaving the coast carried a reminder of what failure would mean. There were moments when everything nearly ended. Moments when her army scattered, when betrayal crept close enough to whisper her name, when surrender would have meant survival, but at a price her soul refused to pay. If you're still listening, stay with her here, because what she chose next would transform her from a resisting ruler into a living symbol, feared by colonizers, revered by her people, and slowly erased by the histories written against her. And the most dangerous phase of her life was only beginning.
By now, her name no longer traveled alone. It arrived with fear. Along the rivers and forests, whispers spread ahead of her armies. Some called her a savior, others called her unnatural. The Portuguese chose a different word entirely: dangerous. They spoke it quietly at first, then openly, then with obsession. A woman who could not be defeated was not merely an enemy, she was an offense to the order they believed God Himself had designed. And yet, power was costing her more than war ever had. To rule as she did, she had hardened herself beyond comfort. She demanded discipline so severe that even allies trembled. Desertion was punished without mercy. Dissent disappeared quickly. She knew the stories spreading about her cruelty, and she let them spread. Fear, she understood, was cheaper than blood. But fear has a shadow. Inside her court, trust became rare. Every smile could be a blade. Every celebration could hide a plot. She slept lightly, surrounded by guards, knowing that survival now depended not just on defeating enemies, but on preventing proximity. Still, she endured. Still, she adapted. When Portuguese pressure intensified, she made a decision that stunned both sides. She aligned herself with another European enemy of Portugal, Protestant powers, foreigners with different flags, different prayers, but the same hunger to weaken Portuguese control. It was a gamble born of desperation and clarity. She did not believe in saviors, she believed in balance. For a time, it worked. Portuguese forts fell, slave routes were disrupted, captives were freed, some. The land breathed again briefly. Her authority reached its height during these years. She was no longer merely defending territory, she was shaping history in real time. But empires do not forgive humiliation. Portugal returned with reinforcements, with deeper resources, with patience sharpened into strategy. They did not rush her this time. They isolated her, cut supply routes, turned former allies, whispered rewards into the ears of the desperate. Slowly, methodically, they tightened the circle. Years passed like this, attrition disguised as stalemate. She aged in armor. Lines carved her face. The fire remained, but the body carrying it grew heavier. Many of those who had first followed her were gone now, dead, captured, scattered. New warriors knew her as a symbol more than a person. Legends replaced memories, and legends are lonely. There were moments, rare, unrecorded, when she allowed herself silence, when she remembered the girl who once listened from the edges of power, learning how men ruled, when she wondered if history would ever tell this story honestly, or if it would bury her beneath excuses and footnotes. If this story matters to you,
Stay with it. Stories like hers survive only when someone chooses to remember. In her final years of war, defeat did not come as a single blow. It came as erosion. Territory shrank, options narrowed, allies vanished. Still, she refused surrender. Even when captured, she negotiated. Even when weakened, she commanded respect. Even when stripped of the battlefield, she refused to kneel in spirit. They took her from the land she fought for, removed her from the soil that gave her strength. They believed distance would erase her. They were wrong, because what remained of her was more dangerous than any army, an idea. A woman who proved that power does not ask permission, that resistance can outlive defeat, that some names refuse to die quietly. And as her final chapter approached, the world prepared to forget her. She did not.
They thought removing her would finish the story. Chains replaced armor. Distance replaced battlefields. The ocean, once a route of stolen lives, now carried her away from the land she had defended with everything she had. To the Portuguese, exile was mercy. To her enemies, it was closure. To history, it was supposed to be silence. But exile only changed the shape of her power. She arrived in a foreign city, stripped of command, watched carefully, spoken about as if she were already a ghost. No army followed her now. No drums announced her presence. The woman who had forced governors to meet her eye to eye now walked streets where her name meant nothing. And yet, she observed, always observing. She learned the rhythms of this new world as she had learned every battlefield before it. Who truly held influence, who pretended to, which promises were made loudly and which were kept quietly. She spoke when it mattered. She waited when patience was the sharper weapon. The Portuguese expected gratitude, compliance, a slow fading into irrelevance. Instead, they found resistance had simply learned a new language. She petitioned, she argued, she negotiated with the same precision she once commanded armies. She demanded recognition as a ruler, not a defeated rebel. She forced officials to acknowledge her legitimacy even as they denied her freedom. Each document, each recorded title became a small victory, proof that she still existed in their system and could not be erased cleanly. But time is cruel to those who live intensely. Her body weakened. Years of war, hunger, and vigilance took their toll. Illness crept in quietly, without banners or warning. Still, she refused pity. Still, she refused invisibility. Even confined, even ill, she maintained the posture of someone who had never bowed. What hurt most was not captivity, it was absence. She no longer knew which villages still stood, which children had survived, whether the rivers she once crossed still carried the same songs. Distance severed her from the people she had protected, and that wound cut deeper than any blade. When death came, it did not arrive dramatically. No battlefield, no final speech, just a quiet end, far from the land that shaped her. And with her death, the erasure began. Colonial records reduced her to inconvenience, a rebel, a footnote, a woman who caused trouble. Her motives were distorted, her victories minimized, her cruelty exaggerated, while the violence of empires was sanitized and justified. History, written by those who won the trade routes, moved on. But memory does not obey empires. Among her people, her name did not vanish, it transformed. Stories softened some edges, sharpened others. She became more than flesh, she became a symbol,
of refusal, of dignity, of a woman who forced the world to reckon with her, even when it tried not to.
Long after her body failed, the battle continued. Empires are comfortable fighting the living. They struggle with the dead, especially the dead who refuse to stay silent. After her passing, the Portuguese claimed victory. Reports were filed, territories renamed, churches built where command posts once stood. On paper, the resistance was finished. The woman who had defied them for decades was gone, and with her, they believed, the threat. But something uneasy followed them. Her name kept surfacing in whispered warnings, in songs sung low at night, in stories told to children who had never seen her but somehow knew her posture, her defiance, her refusal to kneel. Colonial officials heard it and dismissed it as superstition. They were wrong. Memory, when shared, becomes infrastructure. It outlasts walls. The systems she disrupted did not simply reset. The slave routes she attacked never fully recovered their earlier efficiency. Distrust lingered. Resistance cells learned from her tactics, mobility, deception, strategic retreat. Women, watching from the edges of history, saw proof that authority could be taken, not granted. Even in defeat, she had altered the calculations of power. This is the part history prefers to skip, because it complicates the narrative. Colonial archives worked carefully. They reframed her as an anomaly, a problem, an exception that proved the rule. They emphasized her severity, detached her violence from context, and ignored the violence that forced her hand. It was easier that way, cleaner, more comfortable for textbooks. But oral memory does not obey footnotes. In Dongo and beyond, she became something larger than a ruler. She became a measure, a comparison. When leaders failed, people asked, would she have allowed this? When courage was needed, her story returned like a blade pulled from hiding. Even centuries later, when new flags replaced old ones, her absence was felt. Nations struggled with identity, with the scars left behind by conquest. And there, beneath the debates and borders, her shadow remained, reminding people that resistance had once spoken in their language, from their soil. Historians would eventually rediscover her, slowly, carefully, often reluctantly. She did not fit clean categories. She was not gentle enough for sainthood, not cruel enough for villainy, not submissive enough to be ignored. Scholars argued over her motives, her methods, her morality. Some tried to tame her story. Others tried to claim her for causes she never lived to see. None fully succeeded, because she was forged in conditions that resist simplification. If you're listening to this story now, you are part of what keeps it alive. Stories like hers survive not because they are comfortable, but because they are necessary. If you believe forgotten histories matter, staying with stories like this is how they endure. Her legacy is not a statue or a date. It is a disruption, a reminder that power can be challenged even when defeat feels certain, that leadership can emerge from the margins, that women, erased repeatedly from the record, still shaped the world beneath the ink. And yet, the last injustice remained. For all she changed, her name was still missing from the places it should have been carved. Her strategies were studied without credit, her resistance absorbed into broader narratives that softened its edges. But the last word was never the empire's, because as long as her story is told, not as legend alone, but as lived struggle, the erasure fails. And in the final chapter, we return to the question history never answered properly. What does it mean to win when refusing to surrender was already enough?
History likes endings that feel clean. This story does not offer one. There was no moment when the land fully healed, no single day when justice arrived to balance the scales. What came instead was something quieter, slower, and far more difficult to erase: memory. Long after cannons fell silent, after flags changed and borders hardened, her presence lingered in the way people spoke about power, in the suspicion of easy promises, in the refusal to accept domination as destiny. She had taught her people something the empire never intended to leave behind: the knowledge that resistance was possible even when victory was not guaranteed. That knowledge survived her. Centuries passed. New rulers rose, new systems replaced old ones. Colonization eventually loosened its grip, but its scars remained: economic, cultural, psychological. Nations struggled to name themselves again after so long being renamed by others, and in those moments of reckoning, her story resurfaced. Not as nostalgia, as instruction. She became proof that leadership does not always look gentle, that survival under oppression demands choices history later finds uncomfortable, that morality, when judged from safety, often misunderstands those forced to decide under threat of extinction. Modern movements would claim her, debates would rage. Was she a nationalist, a feminist icon, a ruthless monarch? The truth resisted every label. She existed before those words were invented. She acted before anyone asked permission to define her. What mattered was this: she confronted empire on its own terms and survived long enough to disrupt it. She forced European powers to negotiate rather than simply conquer. She delayed expansion that assumed inevitability. She shattered the myth that resistance was futile. And she did it in a world where her very existence in power was considered impossible. That is why she was almost erased. Empires forgive defeat more easily than defiance. But erasure failed. Her name returned through scholarship, through art, through voices determined to recover what had been buried. Each rediscovery was an admission that history had been incomplete. Each retelling weakened the silence that once surrounded her. And now you know her too. Not as a statue, not as a myth, but as a human being who chose to stand when kneeling would have been easier and safer. Her life reminds us that winning is not always about survival. Sometimes it is about refusal, about leaving behind a fracture in the story of power that no empire can fully repair. The rivers she once crossed still flow. The land still remembers footsteps even when names fade. And every time someone asks whether resistance matters, whether one voice can slow an empire, the answer has already been given. She answered it, and history is still catching up.